Mr. Peter Grant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend the Right Honourable Member for Rushcliffe and in particular the Shadow Secretary of State for two outstanding contributions to this debate. This bill, the whole Brexit process, not only gives an opportunity but requires us to go right back to think fundamentally about what we think Parliament is for and what we think democracy is about. The Scottish National Party supports as a fundamental principle the ancient and honoured tradition that sovereignty over the land of Scotland is inalienably vested in the people of Scotland. And that is a principle that is not for sale now, not for sale at any time or to anybody. This bill seeks to use up and undermine that sovereignty in a number of ways that I'll refer to later in my speech. That fact alone would compel me to vote against the bill when it comes before us for a vote on Monday night. It compels anybody who believes in the sovereignty of the people and anybody who purports to be here on behalf of the people of Scotland to oppose the bill on Monday night, regardless of which party is trying to put them to do something different. Given that it will be the Labour reasoned amendment that is taken, I want to make a few comments on that. We will be supporting Labour's reasoned amendment on Monday night with some reservations. First of all, given that 62% of our citizens voted to remain in the European Union, I'm certainly not ready to give up on that yet for the people that I represent. I fully understand and respect the fact that two nations of the United Kingdom voted to leave. I would ask the members of Parliament from those two nations to respect the fact that two nations voted to remain, and those votes cannot simply be cast aside. Secondly, there's a reference in the reasoned amendment to parliamentary sovereignty. Again, I respect the fact that for some people that's an important principle, but that principle does not apply universally across the nations of these islands. I'll give way briefly here.
Is he not aware, is the Honourable Gentleman not aware of the question that was on the ballot that we went to? It was a United Kingdom question. It was a United Kingdom vote. And we voted as a United Kingdom to leave the European Union. That's what we decided. Don't you understand that?
What about your
seriously the best you could do?
I don't know which part of the people of Scotland are sovereign. The honourable gentleman opposite doesn't understand. The people of Scotland are sovereign. The sovereign will of the people of Scotland is what I will defend. And what I again would urge all members of Parliament from Scotland to respect when the time comes. The final concern that I have with Labour's reasoned amendment is in reference to a traditional period. I need to make some progress, thank you. I warmly welcome the fact that we now have a lot more clarity from Labour about the benefits of membership of the single market and the customs union. I welcome the fact that they made reference to that in the reasoned amendment. I'm disappointed, given that everybody now knows, the Norwegians certainly do, that there's absolutely no reason why being out of the European Union means you have to be out of the single market. I'm disappointed that Labour have not yet come round to the position that says we should be attempting to stay in the single market permanently after the UK leaves the European Union. But having said that, the reasoned amendment of Labour is a vast improvement on allowing the bill to go ahead unchallenged. So we will be supporting the reasoned amendment from the opposition on Monday evening. Not just now, thank you. It's interesting, if you look at all the reasoned amendments that have been put forward, the huge number of very powerful reasons that different MPs from different parties have come up with for rejecting this bill at this stage. That tells us that there's a huge number of serious and sometimes fundamental flaws in the bill, which mean that it cannot be allowed to go forward in its present format. And if that gives a problem for government timetablers, well, tough. The interests of my constituents are far more important than the interests of the government business managers. I want to look at four particular weaknesses in this bill, some of which have been very ably covered already. First of all, there's the act of constitutional betrayal that the bill proposes. It gives a Tory government in London the right to claw back any powers it fancies from the elected parliaments by the three devolved nations of the United Kingdom. That's not just a betrayal of those who campaigned for so long, not just now, thank you, who campaigned for so long to have those parliaments re-established. It's a betrayal of the great parliamentarians of all parties on the run who have worked so hard to make those parliaments succeed. I'll give way now, yeah.
Thank you. The honourable member talks about representing Scotland. Let us remember that 1 million Scots voted to leave, and in fact 1/3 of SNP voters to leave. So actually, because of their public stats. So what you're actually saying is that if you truly want to represent your constituents, you should respect the democratic will of the United Kingdom, of which you are in this Parliament and we are all there to do. If honourable members opposite want to be stronger for Scotland, I suggest you engage in the detail of the amendments in the bill and not trying to create a wedge between the nations of the United Kingdom.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'll quite happily see his 1 million Scottish votes to leave the European Union and raising 1.6 million Scottish votes to leave the United Kingdom. Not to mention the 2 million or so who voted to remain in the United Kingdom because he and his colleagues promised unconditionally that that was the way to protect our membership of the European Union. I'll take no more interventions from people whose position on the European Union has changed so radically over the last couple of years. But let me get back to my comments about the attempt to grab power back from the devolved parliaments, for which so many of us worked so hard to establish. Many of those who take the greatest credit for it, for example the great Donald Muir, are not here to see the success of what they created. I shudder to think what they must be thinking now when they see that the attempts have been made to completely emasculate all three of those devolved parliaments.
It's shameful. Absolutely shameful.
It's also a betrayal of the promises, you could almost say the vow, that certain people made to the people of Scotland just 3 years ago. The most powerful devolved parliament in the world, they said. Scotland should lead the Union, they said. Parity of esteem and equal partnership of nations, they said. Mr Speaker, what definition are they using? If the Prime Minister who takes her authority from this Parliament decides it's beneath her status even to meet with the First Ministers who take their authority from the respective national parliaments, what definition of equality or parity of esteem are they using, Mr Speaker? Where's the parity of esteem if the Joint Ministerial Council, trumpeted by the Tories less than a year ago as the epitome of good relations between our four national governments, hasn't met for 7 months? Although I note that, completely coincidental to attempt by my honourable friend from Skylock Harbour to have an urgent debate on the matter, that since then the government have decided that they are going to reconvene the JMC sometime in the autumn, and I hope they won't fall back on the claim that autumn finishes on the 30th of November. So I welcome the fact that they've given way to some pressure and are now going to reconvene it, but the fact is they've done nothing, even ignoring a request by the national governments of Wales and Scotland, a request that they had promised to act on within 1 month. They broke that promise, as they've broken so many other promises to the peoples and the parliaments and governments of those devolved nations. I'll happily give way here.
Would you agree with me that it would be very simple and straightforward for the government to accept the reality of devolution, and that where there is repatriation of powers from Brussels in devolved areas, those powers go directly to the devolved institutions?
Absolutely. That's what devolution means. If the powers are currently devolved, they should remain devolved. Mr Speaker, if we can't trust the Tories to keep their word on something as simple as arranging a joint meeting of government ministers, nobody in any of the devolved nations can trust their assurances that the draconian new powers in this bill will not be abused, because our experience of promises from the party opposite suggest that we cannot take them at their word unless the legislation is nailed down so tightly that they can't have any wriggle room at all to go back on their word. We've heard a lot of rhetoric about some issues needing a UK-wide approach. I'm interested to wonder how the UK-wide approach to agriculture and animal welfare and food standards is going to work in Northern Ireland, because regardless of what the legislative or constitutional position was going to be, a matter of business survival is that the food industry in Northern Ireland will follow the same standards that are followed in the Republic of Ireland. They will follow the same standards as apply in the European Union. So we're talking about different animal welfare standards in Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom. I can't really see how that is working. But what a UK-wide approach is being shown to mean in practice is that the Prime Minister and a few hand-picked colleagues get the right to dictate to the peoples of these islands and to our elected governments. For example, it was the need for a UK-wide approach that led to Scotland's fishing industry being sold out by the British government when we first joined the EU, and there's a serious danger that the need for a UK-wide approach will lead to those fishermen being sold out yet again as part of the process of leaving. My second concern, Mr Speaker, is about the all-encompassing powers set out in Clause 9, for example, which I think was superbly torn to shreds by the Shadow Secretary of State a few minutes ago. One of the Prime Minister's own backbenchers, right now member for BrExit, described this on Wednesday as an unprecedented power grab, and there's no other way it can be described. 649 elected MPs will be expected to stand by and watch while a single minister with a single signature can make new legislation, including the right to make legislation that should require an act of this Parliament. And the only requirement on the minister to be allowed to do that is that she or he thinks the legislation is a good idea. Mr Speaker, when we have ministers that think welching on the Dubs Amendment and introducing the rape clause were a good idea, I'm looking for a slightly harder test than the fact that a Tory government minister thinks something is a good idea.
Well said.
These new powers have been referred to, Mr Speaker, as Henry VIII powers. Well, Henry VIII was a despot, no interest in democracy, who thought Scotland and Wales were just places to be conquered and trampled on. So perhaps Henry VIII is not such a bad name for some of what the government are doing. But I think using that nickname hides the danger of these proposed powers. Despite his murderous deeds, a lot of people see Henry VIII as a figure of fun, a kind of pantomime villain that even got to star in his own Carry On film. But the fact of the matter is that the powers in this bill are more 1984 than Carry On Henry. The powers that bear his name are anything but funny. They represent a significant erosion of parliamentary democracy. Indeed, for those members present who believe in the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty, the powers in this bill are utterly incompatible with the idea of parliamentary sovereignty. It's not taking back control to Parliament, it's not resuming parliamentary sovereignty. For those nations of the UK where parliamentary sovereignty exists, this bill threatens to destroy it once and for all. The powers are designed to allow ministers to bypass all pretext of parliamentary scrutiny. It's even possible that we could see an Act of Parliament receive the royal assent one day and then be repealed by a minister the next day, simply because the minister thinks that's a good idea. The government will argue that delegated powers are an essential part of a modern government, and I agree. We don't have an issue with the principle of using delegated legislation. We do have an issue of allowing delegated legislation to be abused to bypass proper scrutiny. And the only way that this House can be satisfied that the powers will not be abused is if the legislation is reworded to make it impossible for them to be abused in that way. The third significant weakness, which again has been touched on, concerns our membership of the biggest trade agreement in the world. And we're going to throw that away. In Scotland, we're talking about the loss of 80,000 jobs, the loss of £11 billion per year coming into our economy as a result. The figures for the rest of the UK will be proportionate to that, simply to pacify the extreme right wing and the Conservative Party and their allies, whose obsession with the number of immigrants has blinded them to the massive social and economic benefits that these EU nationals have brought to my constituency, and I suspect to every constituency in the United Kingdom. The sheer immorality of the isolationist, xenophobic approach that the Conservatives are trying to drag us down is there for all to see. But it's not just immoral, it's daft. It threatens to destroy our economy. Already we're seeing key sectors in industry and key public service providers struggling to recruit the staff that they need. It was reported a week or two ago that a private recruitment firm are being offered £200 million just to go and persuade workers to come to the UK to work in our health service. Mr Speaker, I've got a hospital in my constituency that we could rebuild for £200 million quite comfortably, and it's going to be handed to a private firm to try to undo some of the damage that is being done by the government's obsession with the number of immigration. I can also say that with the collapsing pound, meaning British wages are worth a lot less to European workers than they were before, with the anti-European rhetoric and hysteria that we still get from the government benches, and with the government still refusing to give European nationals the absolute unconditional and permanent guarantees that they deserve if they choose to come and live here. Those recruitment difficulties are going to become much, much worse before they get any better. The Secretary of State wants our EU partners to be innovative, imaginative and flexible. I would urge him, Mr Speaker, to apply those same qualities to his government's attitude to membership of the single market. I've mentioned the plight of EU nationals, and another major concern, which again has been raised particularly by the Shadow Secretary of State, is that this bill threatens to undermine the rights not only of EU nationals, but of everyone, regardless of nationality or citizenship, who lives on these islands. I hear the promises from the government. We've had promises from this government before. They are not worth the paper they're written on, even if they're not written down on paper at all. Yesterday, at Prime Minister's Questions, we had the usual charade of a Tory backbencher asking a planted question so the Prime Minister could confirm how successful they'd been in bringing down unemployment. She went so far as to say that unemployment in the UK is at its lowest for over 4 decades. Let's just think about that. The Prime Minister is telling us that unemployment is lower now than it was when it went into the European Union and the single market. How can the Conservative Party, on the one hand, boast about having almost done away with unemployment altogether, and then say that immigrants are to blame for this huge unemployment problem we've got? The fact of the matter is that free movement of people, free movement of workers, membership of the single market has not caused unemployment, it has caused employment. It has benefited our economy, it has helped our businesses to thrive, it keeps schools open in places otherwise the schools would have closed. All evidence suggests, Mr Speaker, that the most successful, the wealthiest and the happiest countries in the world, those with the highest standard of living for the material or in the things that really matter, are countries that are open, that are inclusive. The government are trying to move us away from that position to becoming one of the most isolationist and isolated economies in the world. There are only 5 countries in the world at the moment that are not part of the trade agreement. None of them are countries that we would want to see as an example. To conclude, Mr Speaker, the government's mantra on Brexit has been taking back control. That's not going to happen, at least not in the way that the people who voted to leave hoped it would happen, because it's not about taking back control to 650 people who collectively hold a democratic mandate from our constituents to represent them. It's about taking back control from this Parliament into the hands of a few ministers. It's about taking back control from the devolved and elected national parliaments and assemblies of Scotland, of Wales, of Northern Ireland, and putting it into the hands of a few chosen members of a political party that can't get elected into government in Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland.
Or get a majority.
It allows ministers to usurp the authority of Parliament, gives them absolute power to override the will of Parliament. A lot has been said about the UK Government's red lines in the Brexit negotiations, Mr Speaker. I'll give the Minister one red line from the sovereign people of Scotland. Our sovereignty is not for sale. It is not for sale today, it is not for sale any time in the future, not to anyone and at any price. This bill seeks to take that sovereignty from us more than any bill that has been presented to this Parliament probably since we were dragged into it over 300 years ago. That is why I would urge every MP who claims to act on behalf of the people of Scotland, every MP who believes in the sovereignty of the people, every MP who believes in the sovereignty of democratic institutions, to vote with us and against the bill on Monday night.